I've never been much for sharing personal stories. Not the deep ones anyway. 25 years of silence felt right until now. But something's been nudging me lately. Maybe it's getting older. Maybe it's seeing younger guys coming back from their own wars with that same look in their eyes. The one that says they've seen something they can't explain. So here I am, Sergeant James Connor, United States Army, 25th Infantry Division, Vietnam, 1968. What I'm about to tell you happened during my second tour, in a dense patch of jungle northwest of Saigon in the summer of '68. I died there, and I came back different. I know how that sounds. But before you click away, this isn't some ghost story. I'm not claiming to have special powers or divine insight. What happened to me out there was, well, by the end, you can decide for yourself what to believe. I was 23 years old, 6 months into my second tour. My first had been relatively quiet, mostly patrol duty near the DMZ, occasional firefights, but nothing sustained. I'd been lucky. But that second tour, man, that was different from day one. We were pushing deeper into contested territory, places where distinction between civilian and combatant blurred to nothing, where every shadow might hide a sniper and every child could be carrying a grenade. Our platoon had gelled into something like family by then. That's how it works over there. These guys you trained with back home suddenly become more important than the brother you grew up with. There was Davis, our radio man, always with his nose in some paperback when we weren't moving. Martinez, who carried extra med supplies because he didn't trust our actual medic to have enough. Wilcox, who never shut up about his girl back in Michigan. Johnson, the lieutenant fresh out of OCS who was trying hard not to get us all killed. And then there was Taylor, my best friend since basic. We'd been through everything together. Same unit, both tours. He was from some small town in Georgia, had this slow way of talking that made everything sound philosophical. Even when he was just asking you to pass the C rations. Connor, he said to me the night before it happened. We were set up in a makeshift camp, surrounded by triple canopy jungle, so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The air was wet, like breathing through a hot sponge. You ever think about what's waiting on the other side? The other side of what? I asked, cleaning my M16 for the third time that day. It was a nervous habit. The damn thing's jammed enough as it was. You know, death. What comes after? I remember looking up at him annoyed. That's real cheerful talk, Taylor. Why don't you read our fortunes next? He just shrugged, took a drag from his cigarette. Just thinking is all. My grandma used to say there's a thin spot between this world and the next. Places where the barrier gets worn down. And you think Vietnam is one of those places? I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I think any place where enough people die violent gets thin, he said. Like the fabric of whatever separates us from whatever's next, gets stretched too far and tears a little. I remember changing the subject after that. Baseball, I think. Something normal. But his words stuck with me. I didn't know then that in less than 24 hours, I'd be finding out firsthand what was on the other side of that barrier. Morning came with that strange jungle half-light filtering through the leaves. We broke camp early, heading toward a village where intelligence suggested VC activity. Standard patrol formation, moving in columns through terrain so dense we had to use machetes in some spots. The heat was already unbearable by 800 hours, and we were all drenched in sweat. There was something off that day. Any grunt who survived over there will tell you that you develop a sense for it. The jungle gets too quiet. Birds stop singing. The hair on your neck stands up for no reason you can name. By midday, we were all feeling it. Something ain't right, Martinez muttered as we paused to check our position. Lieutenant Johnson consulted his map, looking too young for the responsibility he carried. Intel says the village is 2 clicks northeast. We should reach it by afternoon. I caught Taylor's eye. He gave me that look. The one that said he was thinking the same thing I was. This felt like walking into something bad, but orders were orders. We moved out, more spread apart now, everyone on high alert. The jungle seemed to close in around us, a living thing with malevolent intent. The humidity made it hard to breathe, hard to think. My uniform clung to me like a second skin, and my helmet felt like it weighed 50 pounds. We never made it to the village. The first shot came from somewhere to our right, a single crack that shattered the jungle silence. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from what seemed like every direction. The air filled with the distinctive sound of AK-47s, mixed with our own M16s. I dove for cover behind a fallen tree, my training taking over where conscious thought failed. To my left, Davis was already on the radio, calling for support. To my right, Taylor had taken position behind a large tree trunk, returning fire. Contact right, Someone was shouting, though it hardly mattered. We were surrounded. Lieutenant Johnson was trying to organize a perimeter, but it was chaos. The jungle that had seemed so still moments before was now alive with muzzle flashes and the crack of bullets splintering bark inches from my head. I could see Martinez dragging Wilcox to cover. Wilcox's leg was bloody, his face contorted in pain. I laid down, suppressing fire to cover them, my rifle hot in my hands. "Connor," Taylor shouted over the din. "On your 3 o'clock." I swung my rifle around just in time to see movement in the underbrush. I fired a 3-round burst and was rewarded with a cry of pain. The firefight seemed to stretch into eternity, though my watch would later tell me it lasted only 28 minutes. In combat, time becomes elastic, stretching and contracting with your heartbeat. Adrenaline narrows your vision to pinpoints of absolute clarity while blurring everything else. I remember specific moments with perfect detail. The way Taylor's face looked as he reloaded, determined and focused. The smell of gunpowder and jungle rot and fear. The distinctive sound of an RPG launcher being prepared that made my blood run cold. "RPG! Get down!" The warning came too late. The explosion hit somewhere behind me, the concussive force throwing me forward. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. I scrambled back to position, disoriented but still functioning. When my hearing began to return, I realized the lieutenant was shouting orders for a tactical retreat. We needed to fall back to defensible ground. I looked for Taylor, found him 20 feet away providing covering fire. "Fall back by teams," Johnson was yelling. "First team, move now." Half our squad began moving backward, while the rest of us laid down fire to cover them. I emptied a magazine toward a cluster of muzzle flashes, slammed in a new one. "Second team, move." That was us. I caught Taylor's eye, nodded once. We began backing away from our positions, still firing, moving from cover to cover. And that's when I saw it. The flash of movement to Taylor's left that he didn't notice. A figure emerging from behind a curtain of vines, AK raised. "Taylor, your left," I screamed, already swinging my rifle around. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw Taylor beginning to turn. Saw the VC fighter taking aim. Knew with absolute certainty that my friend wouldn't make it in time. I didn't think. Didn't calculate. I simply moved, throwing myself toward Taylor as I fired at the enemy soldier. I saw my rounds connect, saw him fall, felt the triumph of that moment. Then came the impact, like being hit by a truck. Something punched through my chest with such force it spun me around. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. A white-hot explosion that stole my breath and my strength in an instant. I remember falling. Remember Taylor's face appearing above me, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. Remember the strange wetness spreading across my chest and the coppery taste filling my mouth. "Medic!" Taylor was screaming, pressing down on my chest. "Man down! I need a medic now!" I tried to speak, but blood bubbled up instead of words. The pain was fading already, replaced by a cold numbness that spread outward from the wound. That scared me more than the pain had. I knew what it meant. "Stay with me, Connor," Taylor was saying, his voice sounding farther away with each word. "Don't you dare check out on me." "That's an order, soldier." I wanted to tell him it would be okay. Wanted to tell him I didn't regret it. But the jungle around us was growing dim, details blurring at the edges. The sounds of the firefight seemed to be coming from underwater. The last thing I remember seeing was Taylor's face, streaked with dirt and tears, mouth moving with words I could no longer hear. Then darkness swept in from all sides, and I felt myself falling away from everything I knew. I died in that jungle clearing on August 17th, 1968, at approximately 13:42 hours. The bullet had pierced my left lung and severed my aorta. By medical definition, I was dead within minutes. But what happened next? That's where this story really begins. Death wasn't what I expected. There was no sudden transition, no tunnel of light like you hear about. Instead, there was a gradual fading of sensation. The pain in my chest, the sounds of battle, the feel of the humid air, all of it slowly receding like a tide pulling back from shore. I was aware of being worked on, hands pressing on my chest, someone performing CPR, a needle pushed into my arm. These things happened to my body, but they felt distant, happening to someone else. I was floating slightly above the scene, detached but still connected by the thinnest of threads. I could see Taylor kneeling beside me, his hands red with my blood. The medic working frantically, his face set in grim determination. Lieutenant Johnson calling in a medevac on Davis's radio. And my own body still and pale on the jungle floor, uniform soaked through with blood. There was no fear in me as I watched, just a strange, peaceful acceptance. I knew I was witnessing my own death, but it didn't seem tragic or frightening. It simply was. Then something changed. The scene below began to dim, as if someone was slowly turning down the lights. The sounds faded entirely, and I felt a pull, gentle but insistent, drawing me away from my body, away from the jungle, away from Vietnam. I didn't resist. There seemed no point. I let myself be drawn upward and outward, carried along by a current I couldn't see but could definitely feel. The world I knew receded, replaced by darkness isn't the right word. It wasn't absence of light so much as absence of everything physical. I existed in a void that somehow wasn't empty. How long I drifted there, I can't say. Time had no meaning in that place. It could have been seconds or centuries. But gradually I became aware of something else in the darkness with me. A presence. Many presences. I couldn't see them, not with eyes anyway, but I sensed them surrounding me. Hello? I tried to speak, though I had no voice, no body. Yet somehow the thought projected outward. James. The response wasn't a voice either. More like a thought inserted directly into my consciousness. It carried with it a sense of recognition, of welcome. You are early. I didn't understand. Early for what? I tried to ask, but communication in this place was different. My thoughts seemed sluggish, difficult to organize. The darkness around me began to shift, taking on texture and depth. Gradually, I became aware of, not light exactly, but something similar. A luminescence that didn't come from any single source, but seemed to exist everywhere at once. Revealing, I still struggled to describe what I saw. The closest I can come is to say it looked like a vast landscape, but not one made of earth or rock or vegetation. This was a landscape of consciousness, of energy. Rolling hills and valleys of thought and emotion, stretching as far as I could perceive. And there were others, so many others. They moved through this landscape like currents in water, sometimes taking forms that were almost human, sometimes dissolving back into pure energy. Some seemed ancient, vast, powerful. Others were newer, confused, much like myself. I realized with a start that I had a form here too. Looking down, I saw what appeared to be my body, but it wasn't physical. It was made of the same luminous energy as everything else in this place. A perfect replica fashioned from light. You are between, James. Neither fully here nor there. The communication came from what seemed to be a gathering of the presences, focusing their attention on me. I felt exposed, transparent, as if they could see every thought I'd ever had, every action I'd ever taken. Where is here? I managed to ask. Is this heaven? It seemed a childish question even as I formed it. Something like amusement rippled through the presences. This is a threshold, a place between your world and what lies beyond. You stand at the edge of many possibilities. As they communicated with me, the landscape around us shifted, responding to our exchange. Colors that I had no names for flowed across the horizon. Structures that defied physical laws rose and fell in the distance. Am I dead? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your body has ceased functioning, yes, but you are not yet separated from it completely. The thread remains. I didn't understand what that meant, but before I could ask, one of the presences moved closer. It took on a more defined shape as it approached, still made of that strange, luminous energy, but now forming a figure that was almost human. And with a shock of recognition that resonated through my entire being, I realized who it was. My grandfather. He had died when I was 14, a heart attack while working in his garden. But here he was, younger than I remembered him, vital and strong, looking at me with eyes full of wisdom and compassion. Grandpa? I whispered, emotion overwhelming me. He smiled, and the love in that expression was almost too much to bear. You shouldn't be here yet, Jimmy. He used the nickname only he had ever called me. You have more to do. I don't understand, I said. I was shot. I died. Yes, but it's not your time. You're being called back. Even as he said it, I felt it. A tugging sensation, like a rope tied around my waist being gently pulled. Something was drawing me back the way I had come. Before you go, my grandfather's presence communicated, there are others who wish to see you. The landscape shifted again, and suddenly there were more familiar presences gathering around me. People I had known who had died. My childhood friend who had drowned when we were 10. An uncle who had passed from cancer years before. And then, oh God, then came the soldiers. They appeared one by one, taking form from the luminous energy around us. Men I had served with who hadn't made it home. Rodriguez, who'd stepped on a mine during my first tour. Campbell, who'd taken a sniper round through the helmet 2 months earlier. Peterson, Evans, Michaels, faces I remembered from body bags and hasty memorial services. But they weren't broken or bloody or burned here. They were whole, perfect, at peace. They surrounded me, not speaking, just present, acknowledging, forgiving. And behind them, more figures began to appear. Vietnamese civilians. Men, women, children. People from villages caught in the crossfire. A young woman I recognized with a shock. She had been running from a suspected VC hideout when someone in our unit opened fire. I had seen her fall. She looked at me without hatred or accusation, only a profound understanding that made me want to fall to my knees and beg forgiveness anyway. There were VC fighters too, men I had killed, men who had tried to kill me. Here, the uniform, the ideology, the flags we fought under, none of it mattered. We were just souls meeting in a place beyond the artificial divisions we had created. The weight of it all was overwhelming. I felt myself breaking open, every emotion I had ever suppressed during the war rushing to the surface at once. Grief, guilt, rage, sorrow, love, all of it pouring out of me in waves that rippled visibly through the landscape around us. And they received it all, accepted it all. No judgment, no condemnation, just profound understanding. It's all part of the journey, Jimmy. My grandfather's presence communicated. Everyone here has their own story, their own regrets, their own triumphs. But from this perspective, you begin to see the larger pattern. As he spoke, the landscape around us transformed again. I could suddenly see connections, threads of light linking everyone present, extending outward to countless others beyond my perception. A vast, intricate web of relationship and impact and meaning. I saw how my actions had affected others, how theirs had affected me, how each life touched hundreds more, creating ripples that spread outward infinitely. There was no isolation, no true separation. Even in our most alone moments, we were part of this immense, interconnected whole. The beauty of it brought what would have been tears if I'd had a physical body. It was too much to comprehend, too vast to hold in what remained of my human consciousness. You cannot retain all of this when you return, came the communal thought of the presences around me. The physical brain cannot contain it, but the essence will remain with you. Return? I asked, suddenly remembering the tugging sensation, which had grown stronger. I'm going back? Your time to join us permanently has not yet come, my grandfather explained. There is more for you to do, more for you to learn and teach in physical form. But I don't want to go back. I realized, surprising myself with the truth of it. This place of peace and understanding, of connection and forgiveness. How could I leave it for the chaos and pain of Vietnam? For the confusion and division of the world I'd left behind? That is always the choice, came another voice, one I didn't recognize. A presence moved forward, more luminous than the others. Its energy so intense I would have had to shield my eyes if I'd had any. You can resist the call. You can stay. But there is purpose in return. What purpose? I asked. What could possibly be important enough? The presence didn't answer directly. Instead, the landscape shifted once more, and I was shown possibilities. Glimpses of futures that might unfold if I returned. People I might help. Moments of connection and healing I might facilitate. Words I might speak that would change the course of another's life. I saw myself older, sitting with a young veteran of some future conflict, offering understanding no one else could give. I saw myself holding the hand of a dying friend, providing comfort in his final moments. I saw myself standing between an angry man and his family, absorbing his rage until it dissipated. Small moments, nothing world-changing, no great heroics or public recognition, just one life touching others at critical junctures. Just being present for pain and joy and everything in between. This is the message we would have you carry back. The luminous presence communicated. That beneath the illusion of separation lies the truth of connection. That beyond the temporary divisions of nation and creed and race exists the permanent reality of shared being. That what you do to others, you do to yourself. They won't believe me, I said. If I tell them about this place, they'll think I'm crazy or lying or just traumatized. Some will, some won't. That is not for you to control. Your task is simply to live what you have learned here, to be a window through which others might glimpse what you have seen. The tugging sensation had become impossible to ignore. I could feel myself being drawn back, the luminous landscape beginning to fade around me. My grandfather's presence moved close one last time. "We will be here when you return for good, Jimmy. Until then, remember what you've seen. Remember that love is the foundation of everything. Remember that no one walks alone, even when it seems they do." I wanted to hold on, to stay just a little longer, but the pull was relentless now. The presences around me began to dim, their forms dissolving back into the general luminescence of the landscape. The last thing I clearly perceived was all of them raising their hands in a gesture of blessing and farewell. Then I was moving, rushing back the way I had come, the threshold between worlds approaching fast. There was resistance as I reached it, like pushing through a membrane. Pain began to return, distant at first, then with increasing intensity. The void gave way to darkness, and the darkness gave way to light. Harsh, physical light that seemed to stab directly into my consciousness. And suddenly I was back, slammed into my body with such force that my back arched off the ground. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, no longer distanced by shock, but immediate and demanding. I gasped, choking on the tube in my throat, hands reaching up to claw at it instinctively. "He's back. I've got a pulse," someone was shouting. "Hold him down. He's fighting the intubation." Hands grasped my wrist, gentle but firm. A face swam into view above me. The unit medic, his features tight with concentration and disbelief. "Sergeant Connor, can you hear me? You're okay. You're in a field hospital. Try not to fight the breathing tube." I couldn't have responded if I wanted to. The pain in my chest was unbearable, and my thoughts were chaos. The perfect clarity of the other realm was fading, details slipping away like water through cupped hands. I tried desperately to hold on to it, to remember everything I'd seen and learned, but it was too much. I heard the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors, felt myself being lifted onto a stretcher, caught glimpses of jungle canopy above, then the interior of a medevac chopper. Medical personnel moved around me with practiced urgency. Someone was putting pressure on my chest wound. Someone else was hanging a bag of blood. "Stay with us, Sergeant," a voice kept saying. "You've made it this far. Stay with us." I drifted in and out of consciousness during the flight. The pain would surge, overwhelming me, and I would retreat back into darkness. Then voices would pull me back, insistent and demanding. At one point, I distinctly remember thinking I had made a mistake in returning. The suffering seemed too great, the memory of peace too precious by comparison. But beneath the pain and confusion was something new, a certainty, a knowing that went bone deep. I had died. I had seen something beyond death, and I had been sent back with purpose. I don't remember landing at the field hospital or being rushed into surgery. The next clear memory I have is waking up 3 days later in a recovery ward. Tubes and wires connecting me to various machines, my chest wrapped in thick bandages. Taylor was asleep in a chair beside my bed, his uniform wrinkled, his face unshaven. He looked like he hadn't left that spot in days. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry, too raw from the intubation. All that came out was a raspy croak, but it was enough. Taylor's eyes snapped open, focusing on me with disbelief that quickly turned to joy. "Connor?" he whispered, leaning forward. "You with me, buddy?" I managed a slight nod. He broke then. This tough Georgia boy who I'd never seen shed a tear through all the horrors we'd witnessed. He put his head down on the edge of my bed and sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "You died," he said when he could speak again, raising his head to look at me. "You died right there in that jungle. No pulse, no breathing, nothing. For 4 minutes. The medic was about to call it when you suddenly came back. I wanted to tell him where I'd been for those 4 minutes. Wanted to describe the landscape of light, the presences, the profound sense of connection and forgiveness. But I had no words yet and no strength to find them. Instead, I just reached out a weak hand. He grasped it, holding on like he was afraid I might slip away again. "You saved my life," he said, voice thick with emotion. "That VC fighter had me dead to rights. You took the bullet meant for me." Had I? The firefight was a blur in my memory now, the details lost in the trauma of what followed. But it felt right. It felt like something I would do. Not out of heroism, but out of the simple, profound love I had for this man who had become my brother in all but blood. A doctor came in then, alerted by the change in my vital signs on the monitors. There followed a flurry of activity, examinations, questions I couldn't yet answer, expressions of amazement at my recovery. "The bullet missed your heart by millimeters," the doctor explained later when I was more lucid, "but it severed your aorta. By all medical understanding, you shouldn't have survived long enough to reach us." The blood loss alone, he shook his head. "I don't use this word lightly, Sergeant, But what happened in your case was nothing short of miraculous. Miraculous. The word echoed in my mind, carrying meanings the doctor couldn't have intended. Because I knew that what had happened went far beyond medical science or lucky coincidence. I had been somewhere else. I had been shown things no living person was meant to see. And I had been sent back. Over the next days, as my strength slowly returned, the memories of what I'd experienced began to settle. Some details faded. The specific appearances of the presences, the exact words that had been communicated, the full majesty of that luminous landscape. But the essential truth remained, burned into my consciousness like a brand. We are all connected. Death is not the end. Love underlies everything. I tried haltingly to explain to Taylor what I had seen. He listened silently. No judgment in his eyes, just the careful attention of someone trying to understand something beyond his experience. You think I'm crazy, I said finally when I'd shared as much as I could put into words. He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said at last. I don't think you're crazy. I think, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I think something happened to you over there. Something real. Whether it was exactly how you remember it or your brain trying to make sense of a traumatic experience, I can't say. But I know you, Connor. You're not the type to make this stuff up. It wasn't full belief, but it was acceptance. It was enough. A week later, I was transferred to a larger hospital in Japan, and from there, eventually back to the States. My military career was over. The damage to my chest was too severe for me to return to active duty. I was given a medical discharge, a Purple Heart, and sent home to figure out how to live with what had happened to me, both physically and otherwise. Taylor wrote faithfully. His tour ended 3 months after my injury, and he made it home safe. He told me later that after I was evacuated, the rest of the platoon had fought with a fury born of rage and grief, believing I was dead. They had cleared out the VC ambush position entirely, suffering no further casualties. It was like something was watching over us. He wrote in one letter, like you were watching over us. I didn't know how to respond to that. Had some part of me remained with them while the rest journeyed to that luminous landscape? It seemed possible, given everything else I'd experienced. The boundaries between here and there, between living and dead, now seemed so much more permeable than I'd ever imagined. My recovery was slow and painful. Multiple surgeries, physical therapy, nightmares that left me gasping and drenched in sweat. But unlike many veterans, my nightmares weren't just about the horrors I'd witnessed. They were also about the beauty I'd glimpsed, the peace I'd touched and lost. I would wake crying not from terror but from longing. How do you go on with normal life after seeing behind the veil? How do you shop for groceries and pay bills and make small talk when you've experienced the fundamental interconnectedness of all souls? It was a different kind of PTSD, not just post-traumatic stress, but post-transcendent stress. I kept my experience largely to myself in those early years. The few times I tried to talk about it with doctors or counselors, I was met with concerned expressions and gentle suggestions about head trauma, oxygen deprivation, or stress-induced hallucinations. They meant well, but their explanations felt hollow compared to what I had experienced. So I stopped talking about it, but I never stopped thinking about it. Never stopped measuring my actions against the truth I had been shown. Never stopped looking for ways to fulfill the purpose for which I had been sent back. And over time, I began to understand what that purpose might be. Not to preach or proselytize, not to start a religion or gather followers, but simply to be present, to be a witness, to meet suffering with compassion because I had seen the larger context in which all suffering unfolds. In the years that followed, I found myself drawn to work that put me in contact with others who had touched the edges of that other realm. Hospice volunteering, veterans support groups, crisis counseling, places where the veil between worlds grew thin, where people were confronting mortality and meaning. I didn't always share my story. Often I just listened. But sometimes when the moment was right, when someone's need to know they weren't alone in their experience outweighed my caution, I would tell them about the jungle in Vietnam, about the bullet that killed me, about the journey that followed. And in their eyes, some of them, not all but enough, I would see recognition. The relief of finding someone else who had glimpsed what they had glimpsed, who had returned with the same struggle to integrate the immensity of it into ordinary life. Taylor came to visit me about a year after we both got home. We sat on my back porch in Michigan, drinking beers and watching the sunset, mostly in comfortable silence. But as the light faded, he turned to me with an earnestness I hadn't seen before. I've been having these dreams, he said, about that day, about you. I waited, giving him space to continue. In the dreams, I can see it happening. I can see the bullet hit you, see you falling. But then, he hesitated, took a long pull from his beer. Then I see something else. It's like your body is still there, but something else, something that's still you but not physical, rises up out of it. And there are others there, waiting. People I know died over there. People I didn't know. All of them, I don't know how to describe it. They're made of light somehow. My heart beat faster. I had never told him these specific details of my experience. And then you go with them, he continued, to this place that I can't really see, but I can feel. And it feels, his voice broke. It feels like coming home, Connor. Like everything is okay for the first time ever. He looked at me then, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Is that what happened to you? I couldn't speak for a moment. The lump in my throat was too big, the emotion too overwhelming. Because in his words, I heard confirmation. Not just that my experience had been real, but that its reality had touched someone else. That the message I had been sent back with was being received, one person at a time. Yes, I said finally. That's what happened. That's where I went. He nodded slowly, not surprised, just accepting. Why did you come back? The question hit me hard because it was one I still asked myself on my darkest days. Why return to this world of suffering and separation when I had experienced the perfect peace and connection of that other realm? Because there's still work to do here, I said, repeating what I had been told. Because somehow what happens here matters there. Because love moves in both directions. Taylor didn't ask for more explanation. He didn't need to. Something in him understood on a level deeper than words could reach. We watched the last light fade from the sky, the first stars appearing overhead. And in that moment, sitting with my friend who had in some mysterious way shared my journey, I felt a shadow of the peace I had known in that luminous landscape beyond death. The message I had brought back wasn't just for others, I realized. It was for me too. A reminder that even here, even in this world of apparent division and darkness, the underlying reality of connection and light remains. That what I had seen wasn't separate from this world, but the foundation beneath it, supporting everything. I still carry the physical scars of that day in Vietnam, the chest pain that flares up in cold weather, the jagged line where surgeons opened me up to repair what could be repaired, the limited range of motion in my left arm. But I carry other things too. The certainty that death is not the end, the knowledge that we are infinitely more than our physical bodies, the awareness that beneath all our apparent differences lies a unity so profound that, once glimpsed, it can never be forgotten. I don't know why I was chosen to have this experience and to return with this understanding. I was no saint, no spiritual seeker, just a young sergeant trying to keep himself and his men alive in a war none of us fully understood. But perhaps that's exactly why it happened to me. Perhaps the message carries more weight coming through an ordinary man rather than a mystic or a holy person. Perhaps my very ordinariness is what makes my story worth telling. I'm sharing it now, all these years later, because the nudging I feel to do so has become too insistent to ignore. Because as I grow older, the need to pass on what I learned becomes more urgent. Because I made a promise, standing in that luminous landscape, to be a window through which others might glimpse the larger reality I was privileged to experience. I don't expect everyone who hears my story to believe it. Skepticism is natural and healthy. But for those who recognize in my words an echo of their own unexplainable experiences, or who feel a resonance with some deep intuition they've always carried but never fully trusted, for you, this story might be a confirmation. A permission to trust what you know beyond what you can prove. This is what happened to me in Vietnam in the summer of 1968. This is the death I experienced in the journey that followed. This is the message I was sent back with. We are all connected in ways we cannot fully comprehend from here. The love we feel for each other is not just an emotion, but a recognition of our shared essence. And death, when it finally comes for good, is not an end, but a return. I've carried that truth with me for over 25 years now. Through nightmares and healings, through marriages and divorces, through all the ordinary moments that make up a life. I've tried to live it, however imperfectly, to be the change it demands of me, to treat each person I encounter as if they are, in some profound way, an extension of myself, because that's exactly what I was shown they are. And when my time comes to cross that threshold permanently, to rejoin the luminous landscape and the presences that wait there, as it will come for all of us, I hope to do so with the knowledge that I didn't waste the gift I was given. That I used my remaining years to be a witness to what lies beyond. That I helped in some small way to thin the barrier between worlds. That's why I'm telling you this story now. Not to convince you, not to convert you, but simply to share with you the most profound truth I have ever encountered. You are not alone. You have never been alone, and you never will be alone, even in death, especially in death. I've spoken about my near-death experience before, but never in this much detail. As the years pass, I find the memories growing sharper instead of fading. That seems backward, doesn't it? Most memories blur with time, but this gets clearer. Like my mind needed decades to fully process what happened. The hardest part of coming back wasn't the physical recovery, though God knows that was brutal enough. 3 more surgeries, months of physical therapy, learning to live with chronic pain. The body remembers trauma in ways they never tell you about in the hospital. The way weather changes make your scars ache, how certain sounds bring back phantom pain so real you'd swear you're being shot all over again. No, the hardest part was the spiritual whiplash. Imagine experiencing perfect understanding, perfect peace, perfect connection, and then being thrust back into a world of division and confusion. It's like spending a lifetime in darkness, being shown the sun for a few precious minutes, and then returning to the darkness expected to function as before. Except now you know what light is. Now you know what you're missing. The first few years after coming home were the worst. Vietnam veterans weren't exactly welcomed back with open arms in those days. The country was divided, angry. People saw the uniform and made assumptions. Spit at you, called you baby killer, couldn't separate the policy from the people who had to carry it out. I was lucky in some ways. The medical discharge meant I didn't have to wear the uniform anymore. I could blend in somewhat, hide my service when necessary. The long-sleeve shirts covered most of the scars, but I couldn't hide from myself. Couldn't escape the fundamental disconnect between what I'd experienced beyond death and the life I was now trying to rebuild. Depression hit me hard around 1971. I was working a factory job in Detroit, going through the motions, living alone in a small apartment filled with more bottles than furniture. The doctors had me on painkillers for my physical injuries, and I was supplementing those with whatever would numb the spiritual pain. The longing for that other place became almost unbearable. I remember one night sitting on my bathroom floor drunk, a bottle of pills in my hand, thinking, I could go back. I could go back right now. The temptation was powerful, to force my own return to that luminous landscape, to rejoin the community of souls I'd glimpsed, to go home. What stopped me wasn't fear or moral objection. It was something one of the presences had told me. You can resist the call. You can stay, but there is purpose in return. Purpose. The word haunted me. What purpose could possibly justify this pain, this longing, this exile from perfection? What was I missing? The answer came from an unexpected source. A few days after that bathroom floor moment, I got a letter from Taylor. We'd kept in sporadic contact, but life had pulled us in different directions. He was married now, living in Atlanta, working construction. The letter was brief, just checking in, sharing news about his growing family, asking how I was doing. But at the end, he wrote something that changed everything. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, Connor, about what you saw. I told my brother about it. He came back from Nam 3 months ago, and he's in bad shape. Having nightmares, can't hold a job, drinking too much. After I told him your story, he cried for the first time since getting home. Said it was the first thing that made sense to him, that made him feel like maybe there was some point to it all. I don't know if you're still carrying that message, but if you are, people need to hear it. Some of us, anyway. I read that paragraph over and over until the paper grew soft from handling. It was the first concrete evidence I'd had that the message I'd brought back could actually help someone. That my experience might have value beyond my own understanding. That there might, in fact, be purpose in my return. I called Taylor the next day from a payphone, the first time we'd spoken in over a year. Did you mean what you wrote? I asked after the initial greetings. About your brother? Every word. Taylor said, him and me, we talk for hours and get nowhere. He just couldn't see past the jungle. But something about your experience, it was like a light went on for him. I've been struggling, I admitted, wondering why I'm still here when that place was so... I know, Taylor said quietly. I only caught a glimpse of it in those dreams, and even that was enough to make me question everything. I can't imagine having been there. There was a pause, both of us remembering in our different ways. My brother's in a VA group, Taylor finally said. Guys trying to readjust. He asked if you'd ever consider coming down, talking to them. Not preaching or anything. Just sharing what happened to you. The request terrified me. I'd kept my experience largely private, partly from fear of ridicule, partly because it felt too sacred for casual discussion. The few times I'd tried to explain it to doctors, they'd responded with patronizing explanations about oxygen deprivation and hallucination. "I don't know, Taylor. Just think about it," he said. "These guys are drowning, Connor. If what happened to you could throw them a line." After we hung up, I walked for hours through the Detroit streets, turning the conversation over in my mind. By the time I returned to my apartment, something had shifted. The despair that had been my constant companion hadn't disappeared, but it had changed form. Now it felt less like a weight dragging me down and more like an urgent pressure to act. 2 weeks later, I was on a Greyhound bus to Atlanta. I'd used most of my savings, quit my job with no notice, and packed everything I cared about in a single duffel bag. I had no plan beyond talking to Taylor's brother and his VA group. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was, doing what I'd been doing. Taylor met me at the bus station, his face breaking into a wide grin when he spotted me. We embraced like the brothers we'd become in Vietnam, thumping each other's backs, neither of us quite able to speak for a moment. "You look like hell," he said finally, stepping back to examine me. "Feel like it too," I admitted. The bus journey had aggravated my chest pain, and I hadn't slept more than a few hours the entire trip. "Let's get you home. Lisa's excited to meet you. Been hearing stories about you for years." Taylor's home was a modest ranch-style house in a developing suburb. His wife Lisa was petite, pretty, and visibly pregnant with their second child. Their firstborn, a boy of about 2, peeked shyly at me from behind her legs. "This is Jimmy," Taylor said, scooping up the child. "Named after his godfather, if he ever decides to accept the job." It took me a moment to realize he meant me. James. Jimmy, the name my grandfather had used in that other realm. "I'd be honored," I said, my voice rough with emotion. They'd prepared the spare bedroom for me, insisted I stay as long as I needed. That first night, sitting at their dinner table, watching this small family that Taylor had created, I felt something I hadn't experienced since returning from the other side. Hope. Not the abstract kind, but the tangible hope that comes from seeing life continuing, love growing, the future unfolding in new generations. Taylor's brother Mike came over the next day. The resemblance between them was strong, but where Taylor had emerged from Vietnam relatively whole, Mike carried his damage closer to the surface. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes constantly scanned the room, checking exits, assessing threats. He sat with his back to the wall, a habit many of us brought home. We talked carefully at first, circling around the subject that had brought me there. Mike told me about his tour. He'd been a door gunner on a Huey, seen more death in a year than most people see in a lifetime. I shared some of my own experiences, the safe ones, establishing the common ground of shared service. Only after an hour or so, when Taylor and Lisa had discreetly found reasons to be elsewhere in the house, did Mike lean forward and ask the question I could tell had been on his mind since I arrived. "Taylor says you died over there. That you saw something." I nodded, taking a slow breath. "For about 4 minutes, medically speaking. But where I went, time worked differently there." Where did you go?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. And so I told him. All of it. The transition from my body, the luminous landscape, the presences, my grandfather, the soldiers and civilians I'd known who had died, the profound sense of connection and forgiveness, the message I'd been given to bring back. Mike listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, silence filled the room. I couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he thought I was crazy or lying or something else entirely. Finally, he spoke. "I've never told anyone this, not even Taylor." He paused, gathering himself. "Last month of my tour, we took heavy fire during a medevac operation. RPG hit right below me, sent the chopper into a spin. I got thrown out at maybe 300 feet. He swallowed hard. I remember falling. Remember thinking, this is it. Then, nothing. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a field hospital 3 days later. Broken back, broken legs, collapsed lung. By all rights, I should have been dead." His hands were shaking more noticeably now. "The thing is, there's this gap, this missing time. And I have these impressions, not memories exactly, but feelings. Like I was somewhere else during those 3 days. Somewhere. Gunny and not a good. Peaceful. Where everything made sense." He looked at me, desperation in his eyes. Am I crazy? Did I just dream it while I was unconscious? You're not crazy, I said quietly. And while I can't tell you exactly what happened to you, I can tell you that what you're describing sounds very familiar. The relief on his face was palpable. His shoulders dropped, tension flowing out of him like water. I've been so afraid to talk about it. Afraid people would think I've lost it completely? I understand, I said. Believe me. But how do you live with it? He asked. Knowing what's out there and having to stay here, it was the question I'd been asking myself for years. But somehow, sitting across from this man who was struggling with the same profound disconnect, I found an answer I hadn't been able to access before. I think maybe we're meant to be bridges, I said slowly, working it out as I spoke. People who've seen both sides and can translate between them. Not to convince everyone, that's not possible or even necessary, but to be there for the ones who are ready to hear it, who need what we've learned. Mike nodded thoughtfully. A bridge, he repeated. I like that. 2 days later, I found myself in a church basement, sitting in a circle with 8 Vietnam veterans, including Mike. The VA counselor who facilitated the group had been skeptical when Mike suggested bringing me in, but had ultimately agreed to give me 20 minutes at the end of their regular session. These men were in various states of recovery. Some, like Mike, showed their wounds obviously, jumping at loud noises, constantly vigilant. Others had mastered the art of looking fine while bleeding internally. All of them carried the particular haunted look that comes from seeing too much death too young. When my turn came to speak, I didn't launch straight into my near-death experience. Instead, I talked about the ambush, about watching friends die, about trying to reintegrate into a society that either vilified us or wanted to pretend we didn't exist. I established myself as one of them, someone who had walked the same jungle paths and faced the same struggles. Only then did I carefully open the door to what had happened after I was shot. Most of you have seen someone die, I said. Maybe held them as they went. Maybe been the one who had to zip them into a body bag. We're taught that's the end of the story. Based on what happened to me, I don't believe that's true. The room was absolutely silent. Not even the usual shifting in seats or clearing of throats. Every eye was fixed on me. I told them everything, just as I had told Mike. Not holding back, not softening the stranger elements, not trying to make it more palatable or logical, just the raw truth of what I had experienced. When I finished, I expected skepticism, maybe even anger. What I hadn't expected was the flood of questions, the desperate hunger for details. Did you see Mitchell? He was with the 101st, got hit by mortar fire near Khe Sanh. Was there any pain when you crossed over? My brother, he suffered so bad at the end. Could you tell they recognized you? The ones you knew? What did it feel like exactly? This connection you're talking about? I answered as honestly as I could, admitting when I didn't know or couldn't remember clearly. The scheduled 20 minutes stretched to an hour, then 2. The VA counselor, initially watchful and concerned, gradually relaxed as he saw how engaged the men were, how the usual tension in the room had transformed into something almost like hope. One man in particular, a former Marine named Rodriguez who had barely spoken during the regular session, suddenly became animated. I've never told nobody this, he said, echoing Mike's words from days earlier. About a year after I got back, I was in a car accident. Bad one. They said my heart stopped for almost 2 minutes before they got me back. He glanced around nervously before continuing. While I was out, I had this experience. Saw my abuela who died when I was 14. Saw my buddy Collins who stepped on a mine right in front of me near Hugh. They were, like you said, made of light somehow. And they told me it wasn't my time yet. He shook his head in wonder. I always thought it was just my brain misfiring or something. The doctors said that happens sometimes with trauma. But what you described, it's too similar, man. Too specific. By the end of the evening, 3 men in that group had shared similar experiences they'd never spoken of before. Near-death moments where they had glimpsed something beyond the physical, encountered deceased loved ones, felt a peace and connection they couldn't explain afterward. The VA counselor pulled me aside as people were leaving. I don't know what just happened here, he said quietly, but I haven't seen some of these guys open up like that in years of therapy. Whatever you want to call what you experienced, near-death phenomenon, spiritual encounter, psychological response to trauma, it resonated with them in a way traditional approaches haven't. He handed me his card. We have groups like this all over the city. If you'd be willing to speak to others. That night, lying in Taylor's spare bedroom, I felt something shifting inside me. The purpose that had seemed so elusive was taking shape, becoming concrete. Not a grand mission to change the world or prove the reality of the afterlife to skeptics, but something smaller and yet possibly more meaningful, to be present for others who had touched the edges of that other realm, who needed to know they weren't alone in their experiences. I ended up staying in Atlanta for 3 months. The VA counselor connected me with other veteran groups. Word spread, and soon I was speaking to 2 or 3 groups a week. Not just veterans, but cancer survivors, cardiac patients, people who'd had traumatic accidents, anyone who might have had a near-death experience or was struggling with questions about mortality. I never presented myself as an expert or a guru, just a fellow traveler who had glimpsed something beyond the veil and was willing to share what I'd seen. I didn't charge money, didn't start an organization or write a book. I just showed up, told my story, and listened to others tell theirs. Patterns emerged. While the details varied, there were striking similarities in the experiences people described. The sense of moving beyond the physical body, encountering deceased loved ones or spiritual presences, feeling an overwhelming love and acceptance, receiving some form of message or insight, and perhaps most significantly, the profound difficulty in reintegrating that experience into ordinary life. It's like I have a foot in both worlds now. One woman told me after sharing her experience of clinical death during childbirth, and neither one feels quite real anymore. I understood exactly what she meant. It was the challenge all of us who had touched that other realm faced. How to live authentically in this world while carrying the knowledge of another. How to build a bridge between them without being torn apart by the stretch. Taylor and Lisa insisted I was welcome to stay indefinitely. But by the fall of 1972, I felt pulled to move on. The work I was doing in Atlanta was meaningful, but something told me it was time to widen my circle, to take what I was learning to other places. "You've found your mission, haven't you?" Taylor asked the night before I left. We were sitting on his back porch, just like we'd done at my place in Michigan over a year earlier. "I think so," I said, "though it's not what I expected." "Never is," he replied with a smile. "You know what I've been thinking about lately? That conversation we had the night before the ambush, about thin places." I remembered it vividly. Taylor talking about his grandmother's belief in places where the barrier between worlds wears thin. "You were right," I told him. "Vietnam was one of those places. So much death, so much intensity. The veil gets worn through." He nodded slowly. "But here's what I've been wondering. What if it's not just places that can be thin? What if people can be thin too? People who've been to the other side and come back. Maybe the barrier stays thinner in them. Maybe that's why you can help others make sense of their experiences. You're a thin place, Connor." His words struck me with the force of revelation. A thin person. Someone through whom others could glimpse what lay beyond. It felt true in a way I couldn't articulate. Not an ego boost, but a humble recognition of what my experience had made me. The responsibility it carried. I left Atlanta the next day with no particular destination in mind. Just a general sense that I should head west. Over the next several years, I moved from city to city, staying anywhere from a few weeks to several months. I picked up odd jobs to support myself. Construction, dishwashing, night security, anything that would pay the bills while leaving me free to do the work that had become my calling. I connected with hospice workers who introduced me to patients facing death with fear and uncertainty. I spoke at recovery groups for people who had survived traumatic injuries. I visited cancer wards where patients' thinning bodies were making them into thin places themselves. Everywhere I went, I told my story and invited others to share theirs. Sometimes I was welcomed. Sometimes I was viewed with suspicion or outright hostility. The medical establishment in particular tended to see me as a nuisance at best, a dangerous influence at worst. More than one doctor accused me of giving patients false hope. "What makes you think hope has to be false to be valuable?" I asked one particularly antagonistic oncologist. He didn't have an answer for that. Not everyone I met had had a near-death experience, of course, but everyone was grappling with mortality in some way, their own or a loved one's. And the message I had brought back from that luminous landscape seemed to offer something valuable even to those who hadn't glimpsed it themselves. The possibility that death might not be the end. That connection might outlast physical separation. That love might be the fundamental reality underlying everything. It wasn't always easy work. Sitting with the dying, holding space for grief, being present with people in their most vulnerable moments, it exacted a toll. There were nights I drank too much, trying to numb the accumulated sorrow. Days I questioned whether I was doing any good at all. Weeks when the longing for that other realm became so intense I could barely function in this one. But there were moments of grace too. Moments that confirmed I was on the right path, doing what I had been sent back to do. One such moment came in a hospice in New Mexico in the winter of 1975. I had been visiting with patients there for about a month when the staff asked if I would sit with a particular man who was actively dying. Miguel was in his 60s, terminal cancer, estranged from his family, terrified of what awaited him. He won't talk to the chaplain, the nurse told me. Says he's done too many bad things for God to want him. But he heard about you from another patient, asked if you would come. I found Miguel gone in yellow with liver failure, his once strong body wasted to almost nothing. His eyes burned with intensity, with desperate questions. They say you died, he said when we were alone. His voice was barely a whisper. I did, I confirmed. In Vietnam, 1968. And you? So, saw something? On the other side? Yes. He was quiet for a long moment, gathering strength. I've done things, he finally said. Terrible things. Things you can't be forgiven for. I thought about the souls I had encountered in that luminous landscape. The VC fighters I had killed. The Vietnamese civilians caught in the crossfire. The profound forgiveness I had felt from them and toward them. I believe there is nothing that can't be forgiven, I said carefully. Nothing that puts you beyond love. He made a sound, half sob, half laugh. You don't know what I've done. No, I agreed. I don't, but I know what I experienced. And what I experienced was a love so vast that it contained everything. All our failures, all our wounds, all our most shameful moments. I told him then about the web of connection I had seen, the threads linking all souls together, about how what we perceive as unforgivable from our limited perspective might appear very different from a wider view. Miguel listened, occasionally closing his eyes with pain, but always opening them again to fix me with that burning gaze. When I had finished, he was quiet for so long, I thought he might have drifted to sleep. I killed my brother, he finally said. 30 years ago, a fight over a woman. I stabbed him and ran. Changed my name. Never went back. His voice broke. Been running ever since. I didn't offer easy platitudes or automatic absolution. That wasn't my role. Instead, I simply asked, would you like to tell me about him? About your brother? Miguel began to speak then, haltingly at first, then with increasing flow. About his childhood with his brother, their closeness growing up, the stupid fight that had escalated to violence, the decades of guilt and shame and self-hatred that followed. I mostly listened, occasionally sharing elements from my own experience that seemed relevant, about the non-judgment I had felt from those on the other side, about the understanding that transcended human notions of right and wrong, crime and punishment. We talked through the night, Miguel's life pouring out of him as his death approached. By morning, a subtle change had come over him. The desperate fear in his eyes had given way to something else. Not peace exactly, not yet, but perhaps its precursor. Acceptance, readiness. Will you stay? He asked as dawn broke. Until it's time? I stayed. Through that day and into the next night. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes he drifted in and out of consciousness. The hospice staff came and went, managing his pain, tending to his needs, respecting the space we had created. In the small hours of the second night, Miguel suddenly became more alert. His eyes, which had been cloudy with medication and approaching death, cleared and focused on something I couldn't see. He's here, he whispered. My brother. He's here. I had seen this before. This opening of awareness as death approached. The thinning of the person, in Taylor's terminology. The veil becoming permeable from both sides. What do you see? I asked gently. A smile transformed Miguel's gaunt face. He's smiling. He's not angry. His voice filled with wonder. He forgives me. How can he forgive me? Because that's what waits for all of us, I said. That's what I was shown. Miguel reached out a trembling hand, not toward me, but toward whoever he was seeing. I'm sorry, he whispered. I've been sorry every day. Then he looked back at me, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. Thank you, he said, for helping me not be afraid. He died an hour later, his hand in mine, that same wonder still lighting his face. Experiences like that sustained me through the harder times. They confirmed that the work I was doing mattered, that the message I had brought back had real value in this world of fear and separation. They reminded me that although I longed for that luminous landscape, there was purpose in remaining here, in being a bridge, a thin place, By the late 1970s, the cultural conversation around near-death experiences was beginning to shift. Raymond Moody published Life After Life in 1975, collecting accounts that bore striking similarities to what I had experienced. Research organizations were formed to study the phenomenon scientifically. What had once been dismissed as hallucination or oxygen deprivation was starting to be taken more seriously. I was approached several times to participate in studies or contribute to books. I declined most of these invitations. My experience felt too personal, too sacred to be reduced to data points or sensationalized for public consumption. And I had seen how academia could dissect the mystery out of something, turning transcendent experience into clinical case studies. Instead, I continued my quiet work, moving from place to place, connecting with individuals rather than institutions. I lived simply, owned little. Whatever money came my way through odd jobs or occasional donations, I used for basic needs and traveled to the next location where I felt called. Sometimes I would run into skepticism, people who dismissed my experience as delusion or fabrication. Early on, these encounters would upset me, make me defensive. But as the years passed, I found myself less invested in convincing everyone. The truth of what I had experienced didn't depend on universal acceptance. Those who needed to hear my story would recognize its truth. Those who didn't were on their own valid paths. I returned to Michigan in 1980 to visit my aging parents. Our relationship had been strained since my return from Vietnam. They were practical, hardworking people who viewed my wandering lifestyle and spiritual focus with bewilderment and concern. In their minds, I had thrown away opportunities for a stable career and family to chase something they couldn't understand. To my surprise, I found my father in poor health, his once robust frame diminished by heart disease. My mother, always the stronger of the pair emotionally, met me at the door with a mixture of relief and worry. "He asked for you," she said simply. "The doctors say it's just a matter of time." My father had never been demonstrative, never one for deep conversations, especially about anything spiritual. Our most meaningful exchanges had typically happened while working side by side, fixing the car, mending fences, tasks where words could be few but presence was shared. I found him in the bedroom that had been theirs throughout my childhood, medical equipment now crowding the familiar space. He looked small in the bed, his breathing labored, his skin with the grayish cast of advanced heart failure. His eyes opened when I sat beside him, recognition bringing a faint smile. "Jimmy," he said, using the childhood name I had almost forgotten. "You came." "Of course I came, Dad." He studied my face for a long moment. "Your mother says you've been helping people who are dying." I nodded, surprised he knew this much about my life. We hadn't spoken more than a few words by phone in years. "Because of what happened to you over there in Vietnam." Another nod. He was quiet for a time, gathering strength. "I never asked, never wanted to know. Thought it was the trauma talking, or those drugs they gave you in the hospital." He paused, his breathing ragged. "But I'm asking now." And so I told him. My father, who had never spoken of spiritual matters, who attended church on Christmas and Easter out of social obligation rather than belief. I told him about the luminous landscape, about the presences, about the profound connection and forgiveness I had experienced, about coming back with a message about the nature of love and death. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, the room fell silent except for the hiss of his oxygen machine. "You believe it," he said finally. Not a question, an observation. "I know it," I replied. "As much as I know anything." He nodded slightly, seeming to accept this. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the words clearly costing him. My father had never acknowledged fear in his life. Not of being dead, of the dying part. I took his hand, its once calloused strength now papery and trembling. "I can only tell you what I experienced," I said. "The transition itself, it was like falling asleep. The pain stayed with my body. I moved beyond it." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Will you stay? Until it's time?" The echo of Miguel's request from years earlier brought tears to my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I'll stay." And I did. For 2 weeks, I sat with my father through days and nights, sometimes talking, sometimes just being present. My mother moved through the house like a ghost, preparing meals I barely ate, accepting with quiet grace the role reversal of me caring for my father after so many years of him caring for me. When the end came, it was gentler than I had feared. My father had been restless throughout the day, his breathing more labored, his periods of lucidity shorter. As evening fell, he suddenly became very still, his eyes focusing on the foot of the bed. "Mom?" he whispered. I looked up sharply. My paternal grandmother had died when I was a toddler. I barely remembered her. A smile transformed my father's tired face. "You came," he said, the same words he had spoken to me 2 weeks earlier. He reached out a hand, not toward me, but toward whoever he was seeing. Then his eyes found mine again. "You were right," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, filled with wonder. "Jimmy, you were right." Those were his last words. He slipped away minutes later, that same expression of surprised joy still on his face. The experience with my father deepened my understanding of my purpose. It showed me that this work wasn't just about helping strangers, but about being present for those closest to me as well. That the message I carried was universal, crossing boundaries of belief, education, and background. After his funeral, my mother and I had the first real conversation of our adult lives. Sitting at the kitchen table where I had eaten countless childhood meals, she asked me to tell her everything. About my experience, about the work I had been doing, about the people I had met along the way. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't understand why you couldn't just come home and get a normal job, build a normal life. I thought Vietnam had broken something in you that couldn't be fixed." She reached across the table and took my hand. "But it wasn't that at all, was it? You weren't broken. You were transformed." Her understanding, coming so late but so completely, was a healing I hadn't known I needed. I stayed in Michigan for a time after my father's passing, helping my mother adjust to her new solitude. But eventually the pull to continue my work grew too strong to resist. With her blessing, I returned to my nomadic life, carrying with me a new appreciation for the connections that transcend physical presence. The years that followed brought more of the same work, but with an evolving understanding of its nature. I became less focused on the specifics of my near-death experience and more on what it had revealed about the human condition, our profound interconnectedness, our capacity for forgiveness, the reality of love as the underlying fabric of existence. I found myself drawn increasingly to the edges, not just to those who were dying or who had nearly died, but to those living at the margins of society. Homeless veterans struggling with PTSD, addicts trying to numb the pain of existence, prisoners serving life sentences and grappling with questions of meaning and redemption. In these environments, the thin places seem more numerous, perhaps because when we are stripped of comfort and security, when we face our mortality or our deepest fears, the veil between worlds naturally thins. Or perhaps because those who have suffered most deeply are often more open to possibilities beyond the material world. I never remarried, though there were relationships along the way. The work I did made conventional partnerships difficult. Few people could understand the calling that kept me moving, the lack of material ambition, the comfort with uncertainty. And in truth, a part of me remained always elsewhere, touched by that luminous landscape in a way that made full presence in this world challenging. There were dark times too, periods of doubt when I questioned everything I thought I knew, times when the longing for that other realm became so acute it manifested as physical pain, years when I wondered if I had accomplished anything at all with my life, if the message I carried had made any real difference. The world seemed determined to move in the opposite direction of what I had learned, toward greater division, more intense tribalism, increasing materialism. From the me decade of the 1980s through the accelerating technological isolation of later years, connection seemed to be what people feared rather than sought. Yet each time I fell into despair, something would happen to renew my purpose. A letter from someone I had spoken with years earlier, telling me how our conversation had transformed their relationship with death. A chance encounter with someone experiencing their own spiritual crisis who needed exactly the perspective I could offer. A moment of synchronicity so perfect it could only be interpreted as confirmation that I was still on the right path. In 1995, over 25 years after my near-death experience, I received a call from Taylor. We had stayed in touch over the decades, visiting when my wanderings brought me near Georgia, exchanging letters and occasional phone calls. His children were grown now, with children of their own. He had built a good life, stable, productive, rooted in community and family. "Remember Mike?" he asked after we'd caught up on each other's news. "My brother?" "Of course," I said. Mike and I had corresponded sporadically over the years. He had managed to get his life back on track after those early difficult years, had become a counselor himself, working with veterans returning from later conflicts. "He's in bad shape, Connor. Cancer. Doctors are saying weeks, maybe a month." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of impending loss. "Well, where is he?" "VA hospital in Atlanta. He's been asking for you." I was in Oregon at the time, working with a hospice there. Tell him I'm on my way, I said without hesitation. I found Mike much as I had found my father 15 years earlier. Diminished physically, but with a heightened spiritual awareness that often comes with approaching death. His wife sat beside his bed, tired but steady, holding his hand when pain racked his body. You came, he said when he saw me, the same words my father had spoken. Of course I came. He gave a weak smile. Full circle, huh? You helped me make sense of coming back. Figured you might help me make sense of leaving. I pulled a chair to his bedside. What do you want to know? I remember what you told us, back in that church basement, about what you saw. He paused, gathering strength. Is it still true for you, after all these years? Or was it just something you needed to believe then? It was a fair question. The years had given me perspective, had allowed me to consider alternative explanations for what I had experienced. Oxygen deprivation, trauma response, psychological defense mechanism. I had examined each of these possibilities honestly. It's still true, I said. More true now than when it happened, if that makes sense. Like the meaning keeps unfolding, keeps revealing new depths. He seemed relieved. I've had glimpses these past few weeks, as things have gotten worse, like the barriers getting thinner. What do you see? I asked. Not with my eyes, he clarified. More like awareness, presences. Sometimes I think I can hear them. I nodded, understanding completely. The veil thins as we approach it. From both sides. I'm not afraid, he said, sounding somewhat surprised by this realization. I thought I would be, but I'm not. Sad to leave Elaine and the kids, but not afraid of what's next. His wife squeezed his hand, tears sliding silently down her face. Will you tell me again? Mike asked. Everything you saw? I want to hear it one more time. And so I told him, as I had told so many others over the years. The story had become polished with repetition, but never rehearsed. Each telling was tailored to the listener, emphasizing the elements that would speak most directly to their needs and questions. For Mike, I focused on the soldiers I had seen, on their wholeness and peace, on the profound understanding and forgiveness that transcended the divisions we create in life, on the continuation of consciousness and connection beyond physical death. When I finished, he was quiet for a time, absorbing it all. Then he said something that struck me deeply. You know what I've been thinking about? How you taking that bullet for Taylor changed everything. Not just saving his life, but what came after. You dying and coming back with this message. Me hearing it when I needed it most. The hundreds, maybe thousands of people you've helped since then. He looked at me intently. One moment, one choice, and all these ripples flowing outward. I had never considered it quite that way before. Had never traced the sequence of events from that split-second decision in the jungle to all that had followed. The thought was both humbling and awe-inspiring. I've tried to create ripples too, Mike continued, with the vets I've counseled, sharing what I learned from you without always saying where it came from. Passing it on. You have, I assured him. I've met people across the country who mentioned working with a counselor in Atlanta who helped them see death differently. That was you, Mike. He smiled, pleased. So it continues. The ripples keep moving outward. Mike died 8 days later. I was there, keeping the promise I had made both to him and to myself years earlier, to be present, to be a witness, to hold space for the transition. His wife and children were there too, surrounding him with love as he made his passage. In his final moments, he displayed the same pattern I had seen so many times before, the clearing of awareness, the recognition of presences not visible to the rest of us, the expression of wonder and welcome. His last words were to his wife. It's beautiful, Elaine. It's so beautiful. After the funeral, his wife gave me a sealed envelope. Mike asked me to give you this, she said. Said you'd know when to open it. I put it in my pocket, thanked her, and headed back to Oregon. The envelope remained unopened for months. Something told me it wasn't time yet. That time came the following spring. I was working at a different hospice by then in Northern California. One evening, walking along the Pacific coast as the sun set, I felt a sudden, inexplicable certainty that now was the moment to read Mike's final message. I sat on a driftwood log, waves crashing rhythmically on the shore before me, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in Mike's shaky hand. Connor, when you read this, I'll be where you've already been. Maybe I'll meet your grandfather. Maybe I'll see those Vietnamese kids who've been in your thoughts all these years. I'll tell them you're still carrying the message, still being a bridge, Remember what you told me about purpose? You found yours. You lived it. When your time comes to cross over for good, you'll do it knowing you fulfilled what you were sent back to do. I'll be waiting with the others. No rush. Mike! I sat there until long after dark, the letter in my hands, tears streaking my face. Not tears of grief, but of profound gratitude. For Mike's understanding, for the privilege of the work I had been given, for the mysterious ways in which meaning unfolds across a lifetime. As I approach my 75th year, I find myself reflecting on the journey that began in that jungle clearing so long ago. The young sergeant who died in Vietnam would hardly recognize the old man I've become, with my silver hair and lined face, my collection of battered journals filled with stories of those I've encountered, my lack of permanent address or conventional achievements. Yet the essential truth that has guided me remains unchanged. We are all connected in ways we cannot fully comprehend from here. The love we feel for each other is not just an emotion, but a recognition of our shared essence. And death, when it finally comes for good, is not an end but a return. I don't know how much longer I have in this world. The chest wound that should have ended my life over 50 years ago still makes itself known in chronic pain and reduced lung capacity. New ailments have joined it as I've aged. Arthritis in my joints, cataracts in my eyes, the various indignities of a body moving toward its conclusion. But I face these limitations without fear or resentment. How could I fear the transition that awaits when I have already experienced what lies beyond it? How could I resent the natural ending of this phase when I know it's merely a doorway to the next? Instead, I feel a quiet anticipation, tempered by the knowledge that there is still work to do here. Still people who need to hear what I was shown. Still moments of connection to be facilitated. Still bridges to be built between worlds. Recently, I found myself drawn back to Michigan, to the area where I grew up. Perhaps it's the natural instinct to return to one's beginnings as life cycles toward its close. Perhaps it's something more intentional, a guidance toward particular individuals who need what I can offer. I've rented a small cabin near a lake, its simplicity suiting my needs perfectly. I still travel to speak with groups occasionally, but more often now people come to me, referred by hospice workers, counselors, or others who have heard my story over the years. Taylor visits when he can, bringing grandchildren who call me Uncle Jim, and listen wide-eyed to heavily edited stories of how their grandfather and I served together. The bond between us remains undiminished by time or distance, a living testament to the connection that sent me back from that luminous landscape so many years ago. Sometimes in the early morning or late evening when the light shifts in particular ways, I catch glimpses of what waits beyond the veil, not with physical vision, but with the part of me that has remained thin, permeable, since my journey and return. Awareness of presences gathering, of loved ones watching, of the luminous landscape that will eventually welcome me home. I am ready when that time comes, but also content to remain here as long as I'm meant to, doing the work I was given, being the bridge I was asked to be. This, then, is my testimony, my witness to what death revealed and life confirmed. I offer it not as proof of anything, but as one story among many, one glimpse of a reality larger than any single perspective can encompass. If you have had your own encounter with the threshold between worlds, know that you are not alone. If you love someone who has crossed that threshold, know that they are not gone. If you fear your own eventual crossing, know that what awaits is beyond fear. We are all, each of us, more than we appear to be, more connected, more eternal, more loved. That is the message I died to learn and live to share.